Yeah, MC Salvador, Royal Cortez in the building. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara, Che Guevara, Che Guevara. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara, Che Guevara, Che Guevara. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Take it back, tell the proletariat, holla. From a land where we go hard to the last breath. Complex dialectic of class stressing my intellect, but I intercept it with intelligent weapons. Magnetic waves connect them with the brain, culminate what they repudiate, release the rage of the people. So cruel how they treat it, but he's so smooth on the flow. How he creep and spit some real shit to the crowd.
5 on 20 News, where the news is fresh, but the newscasters are fresher. With Anaïs Quintella
and Zaira Olivier. It's 5 p.m. on Tuesday, March 28th, and we're coming to you live from the Creative Tucson studio in downtown Tucson. First, let's talk local headlines.
Governor Doug Ducey has signed a bill that gives airlines a tax break but will cost the city of Phoenix millions of dollars. House Bill 2064 will cap the amount of jet fuel that the city can tax, which will cost Phoenix about $2 million per year. The tax savings will benefit American Airlines and Southwest Airlines especially. We have a sneaking suspicion that this fact might just be the reason that those airlines lobbied for the bill as part of the Airlines for America trade group. The legislation appeared as an amendment to an unrelated bill in the Senate Finance Committee. But now the corporate tax giveaway is ready for the big time, just as the bill was joyfully signed by Ducey's pen, which uses ink made of jet fuel. A Phoenix lobbyist tried to stop the bill, claiming that the $2 million loss would hurt the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport ability to stay maintained. But Chamber lobbyist Garrick Taylor made the odd argument that the tax on jet fuel hurts the airport's competitiveness. He named other cities such as Charlotte, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C., who don't charge the same tax, because, as we all know, our vacation decisions are based on the competitiveness of airports. If the tax continues, thousands of families will cancel their trip to the Grand Canyon and go to Charlotte, North Carolina instead.
A bill that would protect civilians from liability for saving children and pets is awaiting a vote in the Arizona legislature. Senate Bill 1001, introduced by Republican John Kavanaugh, is a so-called Good Samaritan law ensuring that a good deed will never be punished. Under the law, civilians would be able to break into a car if they have a good faith belief that a child or pet is in danger. The Humane Legislative Council, an organization that includes the Arizona Humane Society, pitched the law to Kavanaugh. Currently, law enforcement and animal control officers avoid liability if they break into a car to rescue a child or pet, but civilians have to contact law enforcement before breaking a window. If the bill passes, then an average person would get their own 15 minutes of fame by saving Barry, the 8-year-old Bengal Terrier who didn't even bother thanking you. While the bill may save lives, critics say that Kavanaugh is under the sway of special interests in the big animal lobby and its leader, Kemba, a 2-year-old black Labrador who claims he's a good boy. The critics, led by several power individuals in the big pussy industry, say that Kavanaugh continues to label dogs as men's best friend and has to post public scratching posts for years. Their leader, a 10-year-old tabby named Christopher Robin, says she would call for a protest right meow. The bill proposed in the Senate is 25-5 in February and awaits a hearing in the House.
And hackers may have stolen personal information of Arizona residents who used an online job search database, according to the Arizona Department of Economic Security. The state agency says that there was a security breach last week on a state website operated by America's Job Link, which links job seekers with employers. The announcement came 2 days after similar breaches occurred in other states, such as Delaware, Idaho, Kansas, and Oklahoma. From February 20th through March 14th, DES says that people's names, date of birth, and social security numbers had been compromised. America's Job Link says that it noticed the, quote, malicious activity on March 12th, which was why the announcement came so late. The company says that they needed to identify the, quote, misconfiguration and eliminate it from the system before the announcement was made. DES Director Henry Darwin says that America's Job Link would notify the affected users by email, which will tell you how you can work from home and make $10,000 a month and meet hot local singles.
University of Arizona researchers will study legal issues and health risks facing airports, including diseases such as Zika and Ebola. A contract with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine will pay for legal research on laws and regulations related to the rights and duties when these diseases are spread through air travel. Issues such as appropriate times for isolation, disease surveillance, and quarantine will be some of the issues tackled in the study. The Regulatory Science Program is a partnership between the Mel and Zuckerman College of Public Health and the James E. Rogers College of Law. Additional funding comes from the Society to Help Instigate Terror, or SHIT.
And Governor Doug Ducey is seeking funding for close to 100 new state government jobs after realizing that this whole government freeze thing didn't work out as well as he thought. Ducey implemented the state hiring freeze after his election in 2015, and he says that it saved the state $21 million. However, his newest budget proposal contains funding for 97 positions across several state departments, agencies, boards, and commissions at a cost of $10 million per year. The governor's spokesman, Daniel Scarpinato, says the hiring freeze always came with exemptions for positions related to health, public safety, and for any critical programs. So naturally, most of these jobs will be for the Lottery Commission, where their primary job will be to make it rain with dollar bills above Ducey's head when he's feeling sad. How do I get one of those?
A former Tucsonan is working in the White House as the Director of Communications for First Lady Melania Trump. Stephanie Grisham used to be the spokeswoman for AAA Arizona and later became the spokeswoman for the Arizona GOP. She worked on the Donald campaign in May of 2016, where she helped fit Trump into his big booty pants and was in charge of finding impossibly long ties in various Ross department stores. Grisham then worked on Trump's transition team before being recruited to be Melania's spokesperson. Grisham said that Ms. Trump's life story is an inspiration to millions of mothers and female entrepreneurs, and she looked forward to helping her communicate her unifying message of kindness and empowerment. She'll now be able to send messages from Melania to the press, such as, "Help me, I'm trapped, and I never asked for this, and I'm married to the annoying orange." Now in national and international news.
The nation collectively hacked up a black loogie today as our environmental terrorist-in-chief signed an executive order rolling back most of President Obama's climate change rules. The order effectively destroyed Obama's environmental legacy, along with the hope that people living on the coast won't need to develop gills to survive. As he signed the Energy Independence Executive Order, Trump was surrounded by coal miners who still believe that he's going to deliver them jobs rather than respiratory infections. The order directs the EPA to start the legal process of withdrawing from and rewriting the Clean Power Plan, Obama's major policy plan to stem climate change. The Clean Power Plan had not yet been put into effect because it was held up by a Supreme Court order, but it would have sought regulations to cut carbon dioxide pollution from coal-fired power plants, which would have resulted in hundreds of older plants closing down. Wind and solar farms and other types of renewable energy sources would have replaced them. But energy experts say that getting rid of this rule doesn't mean that these plants will stay open beyond a few extra years. Robert Godbee, an energy economist at the University of Wyoming, says that the CO2 issue isn't why coal jobs are disappearing, but rather it's the lower demand for coal. He also says that coal mines are increasingly using automation to take over the tasks that used to require human labor. The decrease in coal mining jobs is also a result of increased use of natural gas for energy, which is plentiful in the U.S. Trump, along with the new EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, praised the order as a way to make America energy self-sufficient. But experts such as Godbee say that we don't import coal and that we are already largely energy self-sufficient, as we're now the largest producer of natural gas, the second largest producer of coal, and the third largest producer of oil in the world. And while coal companies praised the order, even they admitted that it probably wouldn't bring the coal mining jobs back. Robert E. Murray, CEO of Murray Energy, said that yesterday he doesn't know how far the coal industry can be brought back. The order also targets narrower but still important environmental policies from the Obama era, such as requiring that federal agencies consider the impact of climate change when analyzing environmental permits. But the executive order didn't mention any moves towards backing out of the Paris Climate Accords, the largest worldwide agreement to fight climate change. But critics say that with the new ruling in place, the U.S. is unlikely to hit the aims of the accords anyway, so it might not make a difference. In more positive news, the Tucson home might soon be beach property, so hold off on selling for now.
Federal immigration agents arrested an individual with DACA status yesterday in Oregon and then released on bond, according to the ACLU. 25-year-old Francisco Rodriguez Dominguez was detained by ICE officials without a warrant after they showed up at his southeast Portland home and took him to a Tacoma detention center. Dominguez has been in the country since he came here at the age of 5 from the state of Michoacan and has been part of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, program since 2013. The program allows individuals who come to the U.S. at a young age to stay in the country without fear of deportation. Despite the recent immigration crackdown, the Trump administration said that they would leave individuals with DACA status alone. But ICE has already detained a few individuals with the claim that they had committed crimes. In Dominguez's case, it could trace back to a DUI misdemeanor charge from his past. However, Dominguez had already completed a diversion program and attended all court dates and required meetings for the charge. Andrea Williams, executive director of immigrant rights organization Causa Oregon, says that even though he made the best efforts to make good on his mistake, ICE now determines that even misdemeanors are enough to end DACA status. ACLU representatives say that a judge already determined that Dominguez wasn't a danger to society based on his DACA hearings, so there's no reason why ICE should be pushing for his deportation. His community is defending Dominguez, where he works for a community organization Latino Network, volunteers at his church, and coaches local soccer team. Carmen Rubio, executive director at the Latino Network, says that everyone loves Francisco and that the neighborhood kids' families and school staff will be heartbroken to hear the news. In the meantime, the ACLU advises undocumented individuals to not answer the door. They said that if it turns out to be ICE, then force them to slip a warrant under the door or hold it up to the window. In response to this advice, ICE officials will now dress up like flower delivery men or a child who lost his baseball in your backyard.
A free speech watchdog filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit on Monday to find out details on the Department of Homeland Security's rules for searches of mobile devices for U.S. citizens. The Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University filed the suit to learn DHS directives for surrendering electronic devices and how to find out how often the searches are taking place. They also want to know the procedures that immigration officials take for collecting information from these devices and the limits of searches in cases like journalists, who are supposed to be protected by the First Amendment. DHS issued an updated search policy in 2009 under President Obama, which permitted searches with or without suspicion. The searches have become more routine over the years. In 2015, there were 5,000 searches, but the number jumped up to 25,000 in 2016. This year, it's looking like it will further break the record, as 5,000 searches were conducted in the month of February alone. Another change is that under the Trump administration's immigration rules, foreign travelers are no longer protected under the Privacy Act, which was the case under Obama and the Bush administrations. U.S. citizens have reported having their electronics searched in recent months, which has fueled criticism towards the policy. Knight Center Director Jamil Jaffer said that, quote, "These searches are extremely intrusive and government agents shouldn't be conducting them without cause." In February, Senator Ron Wyden raised the issue with DHS Secretary John Kelly, warning that the searches were a loophole around gaining a warrant or a subpoena. Wyden said that this was, quote, "short-circuiting the vital checks and balances that exist in our current system." However, a spokesman for the Border Patrol said that less than 0.01% of travels are searched, although they did acknowledge that searches are now more common. The spokesman says that the increase is, quote, "driven by our mission to protect the American people and enforce the nation's laws in the digital age."
Last week, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing on the issue of facial recognition technology, where lawmakers called for stricter regulations of the practice. About half of American adults' photographs are stored on recognition databases that are accessible by the FBI. The agency does not need to give consent for searching through the database, and individuals can be searched without any knowledge. About 80% of these photos are of non-criminals because the database includes pictures from driver's licenses and passports. And to make things worse, according to the Government Accountability Office, the facial recognition algorithms used to identify matches are correct only 15% of the time. Jason Chaffetz, taking a break from trying to destroy the environment, weighed in on the topic. He said that while technology can be valuable for governments to protect their people and for private businesses to protect fraud and identity theft, it could be used for more nefarious purposes. Chaffetz said that he is most concerned about facial recognition technology that allows surveillance and body cameras that scan the faces of people walking down the street. Alvaro Bedoya, a Georgetown law professor, said that there are currently no controls for this type of technology and that it's not under control. The FBI launched its facial recognition program called Next Generation Identification in 2010, but it took them 5 years to announce the program to the public, even though they are required by law to reveal this information. Unlike fingerprints, which are collected when a crime is committed, photos for facial recognition are collected more widely. For example, the FBI made an agreement with 18 states to share pictures from driver's licenses. Michigan Congressman Paul Mitchell called the agreement appalling, stating that he wasn't informed when his photograph was collected as part of the program. Mitchell said that if he had known, that he would have flashed some gang signs. But the FBI's weird stalking habit isn't the only problem with the Next Generation program. The GAO also found that the facial recognition matching is often wrong when it concerns a suspect who is a person of color. They also found that African Americans are more often subjected to facial recognition, even though the software is more often wrong. Despite their findings, the FBI maintains that the software is race blind. Upon hearing the news, former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke enthusiastically applauded the technology, calling it the purification of law enforcement.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced yesterday that his country would legalize marijuana by July of 2018. Trudeau said that legalization regarding the marijuana issue would be submitted next month, which would legalize recreational use across Canada. Under the legislation, producers would be licensed and be able to sell to customers who are at least 18 years old. Canadians would also be able to grow 4 plants per household for personal use. The various provinces in Canada would be in charge of setting their own prices, according to the Canadian Broadcasting Company. This would fulfill a promise by Trudeau's Liberal Party made during the 2015 general election. At the time, the party said it was necessary to legalize marijuana in order to, quote, keep drugs out of the hands of children and the profits out of the hands of criminals. Sensible drug policy is so Canadian. However, Trudeau reminded the country that the drug is not yet legalized and would remain illegal until legislation is passed. In related news, your stoner friend who threatened to move to Canada if Trump won is now sticking to his word.
A new study of Dublin scientists shows that breastfeeding does not contribute to the intelligence of a child, but does prevent hyperactivity. The study published by the Journal of Pediatrics found that children who breastfed for at least 6 months were less hyperactive by the time they reached 3 years old compared with those kids who weren't breastfed. However, they found that breastfeeding didn't correlate with higher intelligence, an idea that spread in recent years. Researchers studied 8,000 Irish children ages 3 to 5 who took standardized tests to measure cognitive abilities. While the breastfed kids scored a little higher, the researchers said that the difference wasn't statistically significant. Previous studies that showed higher intelligence among breastfed kids didn't take into account the parents' lifestyles. Mothers that breastfed tend to be better educated, avoid risky behaviors like smoking and drinking, and are more likely to have books in the home. When these factors were considered, the level of intelligence didn't correlate with breastfeeding, but results are better in terms of hyperactivity because the breastfed kids were shown to be calmer, although scientists said the effect was small. Also, they said the effect showed up at age 3, but the calming effects faded away by age 5 when the children started school. So the study confirms the fact that we've all known all along, nothing calms people down better than boobs.
A Canadian man's name was deemed too offensive to be used on a personalized license plate. Lauren Grabher has had his last name on the plate for decades, but this was suddenly refused renewal this year. Nova Scotia's Transport Department said that the plate could be misinterpreted as a symbol of, quote, violence against women. Nova Scotia's license plate regulations allow the agency to refuse names that they find offensive. Grabher said that he bought the plate for his father for his 65th birthday and started using it himself when his father died. He said that no one has ever commented about the plate and was confused when he was denied the renewal. Grabher thinks he's being punished for our president's language, another legacy of our buffoon-in-chief. Upon hearing the news, Trump condemned Canada for infringing upon its citizens' right to engage in locker room talk and offered to buy the license plate off of Grabher. This was Ani Esquintela
And Zaira Olivier for 5 on 20 News.
Next up, Zaira shares what's really happening with local politics.
Che Guevara, no bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Che Guevara, Che Guevara. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Take it back, tell the proletariat, holla. From a land where we go hard to the last breath. Complex dialectic of class stressing my intellect, but I intercept it with intelligent weapons. Magnetic waves connect them with the brain, culminate what they repudiate, release the rage of the people. So cool how they treat it, but he's so smooth on the flow. How he creepin', spit some real shit to the crowd, but they left me leaning. Said I mean it what I say. Boy, I'm rapping from the grave. Baby mom rather see your dog locked in this cage, locked in this cage. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Che Guevara, Che Guevara. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Che Guevara, Che Guevara. No bourgeoisie, young Che Guevara. Fight back, tell the proletariat, holla. But I know that's how the system play. Break the family unit, drive us insane. Who to blame? The men who graduate and propagate the status quo. Building world-class jails but shitty schools where the young people roam. All alone in my zone, entering other dimensions, intergalactic nexus, intransigent essence, bouncing to algorithms interpreted by socialist thinkers. He rolling with leaders, he know they gon' keep up, stand up for rights of indigenous people. Hip-hop is lethal, necessary evil, lethal, you know that's my ego. So
Good evening and welcome again to Adelante Tucson, Tucson's new platform for political analysis. I am your host, Zaira Olivier.
And I am your co-host, Joel Garcia. Today we'll be taking an in-depth look at the history of the neoliberal ideology which lies at the core of U.S. imperialism. This will give us a more thorough understanding of U.S. foreign policy as it relates to the current immigration crisis. We will discuss everything from the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement to U.S. military interventions throughout the world, and also how the current xenophobic policies of massive criminalization and persecution of undocumented immigrants have become the dominating social norm.
Okay, so let's get started. Let's first begin by defining neoliberalism. The ideology that dominates our lives has, for the most of us, no name. Mention it in conversation and you'll be rewarded with a shrug. Even if your listeners have heard the term before, they will struggle to define it. Its anonymity is both a symptom and a cause of its power. It has played a major role in a remarkable variety of crises: the financial meltdown of 2007, the offshoring of wealth and power, of which the Panama Papers offer us merely a glimpse, the slow collapse of public health and education, resurgent child poverty, the epidemic of loneliness, and the collapse of the ecosystem, the rise of Donald Trump. But we respond to these crises as if they emerge in isolation, apparently unaware that they all have been either catalyzed or exacerbated by the same coherent philosophy. So persuasive has neoliberalism become that we seldom even recognize it as an ideology. We appear to accept the proposition as a neutral force, a kind of natural law. But the philosophy arose as a conscious attempt to reshape human life and shift the locus of power.
Further, attempts to limit competition are treated as an attack to liberty. Tax and regulation should be minimized. Public services should be privatized. The organization of labor and collective bargaining by trade unions are portrayed as market distortions that impede the formation of a natural hierarchy of winners and losers. Inequality is recast as virtuous, a reward for utility and a generator of wealth, which trickles down to enrich everyone. Efforts to create a more equal society are both counterproductive and morally corrosive. The market ensures that everyone gets what they deserve. We internalize and reproduce its creeds. The rich persuade themselves that they acquired their wealth through merit, ignoring the advantages such as education, inheritance, and class that may have helped to secure it. The poor begin to blame themselves for their failures, even when they can do little to change their circumstances. Never mind structural unemployment. If you don't have a job, it's because you are unenterprising or lazy. Never mind the impossible costs of housing. Never mind that your children no longer have a school playing field. If they gain weight, it's your fault. In a world governed by competition, those who fall behind become defined as self-defined losers. This is neoliberalism.
The term neoliberalism was coined at a meeting in Paris in 1938. Among the delegates were Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek, both exiles from Austria. They saw social democracy exemplified by FDR's New Deal and the gradual development of Britain's welfare state as manifestations of a collectivism on par with Nazism. In The Road to Serfdom, published in 1944, Hayek argued that the government planning by crushing individualism would lead to a totalitarian control. This popular book came to the attention of some very wealthy people who saw in the philosophy an opportunity to free themselves from regulation and tax. In 1947, Hayek founded the first organization that would spread the doctrine of neoliberalism, the Mont Pelerin Society, which was supported financially by millionaires and their foundations.
With their help, he began to create a kind of neoliberal international, a transatlantic network of academics, businessmen, journalists, and activists. The movement's rich backers funded a series of think tanks which would refine and promote the ideology. Among them were the American Enterprise Institute, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the Institute of Economic Affairs, the Center for Policy Studies, and the Adam Smith Institute. As it evolved, neoliberalism became more strident, and the belief that monopoly power could be seen as a reward for efficiency began to take hold. It was during this shift that the movement lost its name. Stranger still, even as the movement became more coherent, the lost name was not replaced by any common alternative. At first, neoliberalism remained at the margins. The post-war consensus was almost universal. Full employment and the relief of poverty were common goals in the United States and much of Western Europe. Top rates of tax were high, and governments sought social outcomes without embarrassment, developing new public services and safety nets. But in the 1970s, with the Keynesian policies began to fall apart and economic crisis struck on both sides of the Atlantic, neoliberal ideas began to enter the mainstream. With the help of sympathetic journalists and political advisors, elements of neoliberalism were adopted by Jimmy Carter's administration in the United States and Jim Callaghan's government in Britain.
After Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan took over, the rest followed. Massive tax cuts for the rich, the crushing of trade unions, deregulation, privatization, outsourcing and competition in public services. Through the IMF and the World Bank and the Maastricht Treaty and the World Trade Organization, neoliberal policies were imposed, often without democratic consent, on much of the world. Most remarkable was the adoption among parties that once belonged to the left. This includes Labor and also the Democratic Party, for example. So in order to understand how these catastrophic neoliberal policies have completely devastated Latin American economies, contributing to the detriment of these societies and provoking the current immigration humanitarian crisis we see at our borders today, we must take a closer look at North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. This agreement was signed by the Clinton administration in 1994 as a trilateral trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, seeking to eliminate barriers to trade and investment between the three countries. The agreement was sold by capitalist economists and politicians as a measure to bring about economic growth for all three countries and to prevent immigration. Yet after 20 years, we can confirm that the results were exactly the opposite.
For example, since the implementation of NAFTA, the Mexican agricultural market has been flooded by cheaper U.S. subsidized corn, forcing Mexican corn production to fall by over 56%. This has put thousands of Mexican farmers out of business and has ejected over 2 million peasants from their lands. As a result, over 42% of the food that is now consumed in Mexico has been imported, and this reflects how the food sovereignty of Mexico has been deeply severed. As a consequence of this trade agreement, the poverty rate in Mexico has skyrocketed to over 22 million, which is around 20% of the population. So what has been the outcome of this economic agreement? Well, the fact remains that between 1992 and 2011, the amount of undocumented immigrants crossing into the United States increased from 3.9 million to 11.1 million. After decades under violent U.S.-backed dictatorships and following the successful example of the Cuban Revolution in 1959, Central American struggles for liberation gained unprecedented momentum. In the 1980s, the United States funded and trained bloodthirsty right-wing governments in order to suppress national struggles for self-determination. At the time, in El Salvador, the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, a people's national liberation movement, was fighting against notorious right-wing state death squads, more specific, the Atlacatl Battalion, which was trained to dismantle guerrilla support by means of inhumane state terror tactics, coincidentally trained at the United States School of the Americas, now called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security and Cooperation. These death squads were responsible for the deaths of over 70,000 people.
The U.S.-backed right-wing government of Guatemala also repressed their people with brutal emphasis on mass killings of Mayan people. Still to this day, Guatemalan military officials are being charged with war crimes and genocide of indigenous peoples. There were over 200,000 known deaths in Guatemala alone during this period. A fascist government also existed in Honduras, where U.S. Army presence was especially heavy, as Honduras was the base for U.S. operations in Central America in the 1950s. For instance, when the Sandinistas in Nicaragua succeeded in overthrowing the Somoza dictatorship in 1979, the exiled fled and trained with the U.S. military in Honduras in order to form the Contras, a group intent on counter-revolution. The U.S.-backed Contras caused misery, assassinations, and disappearances in attempts to sabotage the leftist Nicaraguan government. As a result, the U.S. has witnessed massive waves of Central American refugees since the 90s, as people continue to flee from war and violence. In the past 4 years alone, over 50,000 refugee children have fled from Central America countries and crossed into the U.S. border.
It is important to mention that imperialist need for war and destruction is tied to the profits gained by corporations and banks involved in the military-industrial complex. More recently, the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and Syria are wars of occupation which only seek to the strategic geopolitical control of the region, its resources and markets. These occupations continue to destabilize and destroy countries and are completely responsible for the refugee crisis that currently confronts European countries. With over 11 million undocumented immigrants currently in the United States, our government has chosen to pursue massive internal repressive policies to criminalize, persecute, incarcerate, and deport millions of immigrants who overwhelmingly just seek family reunification and the opportunity to a better future. Laws like Arizona's SB 1070 have made racial profiling completely legal. At the same time, federal judicial programs like Operation Streamline, started by the Department of Homeland Security in 2005, and which denied due process, fair legal representation, and imposed coerced plea deals, are driven by the criminal for-profit private prison industry, which seek to profit millions of dollars out of the inhumane incarceration of undocumented immigrants. These types of immigration policies have made illegal entry the most prosecuted federal crime. Likewise, the militarization of the border follows the deceitful policy of prevention through deterrence, forcing migrants to cross over deadly desert terrain. The annual budget for the Department of Homeland Security stands at a staggering $12.4 billion, That is taxpayer money that is being utilized to finance low-intensity warfare against our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Since the election of Trump and with the revitalization of white supremacy in the country, we have seen an intensification in not only anti-immigrant rhetoric, but also in the legal and political persecution of undocumented immigrants. We have seen DACA suspended, leaving close to 1 million people without the ability to go to work, to go to school, and to pay taxes. We continue to see Muslim immigrants being targeted and prevented from legally entering the United States. Fascist programs such as the Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement, or VOICE, recently announced by Trump, are setting the stage for measures of persecution against undocumented immigrants. Previous executive orders by the new president have also increased the number of ICE and Border Patrol agents, as well as threats to defund cities which are committed to protecting and defending undocumented immigrants. And that, folks, is neoliberalism in a nutshell, an ideology that lives quietly at the roots of all of our problems. Did you have anything else to add, Joel?
No, just thank you all for listening very much. Enjoy the week.
Yes, and join us next week. Please share our show, and we'll see you Tuesday at 5.
No bourgeoisie, young check and borrow, check and borrow, check and borrow. No bourgeoisie, young check and borrow. Fight back, tell the